Let's bring you some breaking news now.
There's been a major development in the David Hicks story. A US appeals court has ruled the charge he was convicted of, providing material support to terrorism, cannot be applied retrospectively.
Dan Mori is the military attorney who represented David Hicks, and he now works for Shine Lawyers in Australia. Dan Mori joins us now in the studio. Thanks very much for being here. Just take us through the basis of this decision in the United States.
Basically, it's the DC Appeals Court, federal court, that has basically said, look, the charge that was used in the military commissions in 2006 is a crime that was created after the fact, and it can't be applied to conduct prior to 2006 when it was created.
And this revolved around Salim Hamdan, a former driver to Osama bin Laden, who's been one of the key litigants in the entire US military commission process.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, his lawyers have been pushing hard in the federal case courts, just like we were. He got in the door first, but he was released about 18 months after David. His case has been appealed, and they've ruled that it's been retrospective. And it's something that I hate to say we're kind of vindicated, but we've been saying quite a long time before David's case even went to court.
Yeah, so that's something that you argued in his defence?
Absolutely. It was one of the first motions we filed in 2004 and continued to. But it wasn't just the defense team that was complaining about it. I mean, the Law Council of Australia complained. There was a report done by, the likes of the Honourable Alistair Nicholson, who used to be the former Judge Advocate General for the Australian Defence Forces. He raised this with the Australian government before the conviction of David and pointed this out, and yet it was ignored.
So effectively, it's your reading of this court ruling that the charge of providing material support for terrorism is now off the books. It's not null and void.
It's null and void for conduct prior to 2006, and it wasn't a valid...
Which includes David Hicks's conduct.
Absolutely. There was only 3 from that 2006 commissions. Right. And David was one of them.
Precedent's been set. Where does this... Can you look at going back to the courts in the US to clear his name? And what are you looking at?
Well, the question is, it's really up to his lawyers now that are representing him at Gilbert and Tobin, have done a great job. What if there's anything more to do? I don't think there's any real serious consideration that his conviction was valid. But the real question is, why did the Australian government allow this to happen to an Australian citizen when the British government saw that it was invalid and stood up for their citizens?
Have you spoken to David Hicks this morning?
No, I haven't. I couldn't get through to him.
So he was sentenced to 7 years in jail. He served a bulk of that time already in Guantanamo Bay before striking that plea deal. He came back to Adelaide to serve 9 months from memory. Is there any way, obviously, he served that time, he can't get that time back. Would you like to see, you're no longer his lawyer, but would you like to see his current lawyers move to effectively, legally clear his name? Well,
I think it would be great for some official recognition that what he was put through was not fair and was not just. And I think that this court decision supports that position, and hopefully it will act as some catalyst to getting some real closure and clearing his name officially.
How do you see the Australian government's role in all of this? There's been a lot of criticism of the Labor government since it's come into power in 2007, going quiet on this.
Well, the real issue was back in 2006, when it wasn't just the defense team, and who can blame any government official for listening to the defense? We're not going to listen to the defense lawyers. But when you have the Law Council of Australia and you've got law professors from across the country pointing out the flaws and saying this is not a valid offense, it's being applied retrospectively, how can that be ignored?
It's a landmark ruling. Do you expect this will have ramifications for other people convicted as part of the military commission process?
It could be. Some of the current 9/11 detainees are charged with material support for terrorism under the 2009 Act that is very similar. And the question is, will it go to the Supreme Court, and will the U.S. Supreme Court take this case?
Do you see that's very likely, given it's gone to the Supreme Court at least once, if not twice?
It has twice, actually, dealing with the commissions. I don't know. The government may not appeal this. We'll wait and see here in the next couple months if they actually do.
In 2010, David Hicks launched a complaint against Australia with the United Nations, and apparently a decision on that is due soon. Do you have any news on that?
I don't have any news on that yet. I think it's still pending. And
So it really, the commissions were set up in the mid-2000s. David Hicks was one of the first people to arrive at Guantanamo Bay. Where do you see this process ending? Barack Obama, of course, one of his very first promises, he said he'd close Guantanamo Bay. What do you see this ruling as doing in terms of where Guantanamo Bay is and what may happen to it in the future?
I think it's showing that what they set up was ineffective. Because they were trying to set up an ad hoc process after the fact instead of using our federal court system in the U.S. that has been trying terrorism cases for years before and worked effectively. Unfortunately, the military commission system was set up and it was done rushed and not very effectively, and so now we're seeing the problems with it, right? The foundation's rotten and the house is starting to crumble.
Do you think that, or the idea that a decision like this could have come through might have had an effect on the decision by the DPP to drop the proceeds of crime case against David Hicks earlier?
Well, I think it does show some indications that Australian legal community and professionals here saw the writing on the wall and saw the flaws in the system and made the right decision in dropping the case.
It's a landmark decision which only came down a few hours ago overnight in Washington. Have you seen any response so far from the US government?
No, I haven't. I haven't. I mean, I got woken up this morning with my cell phone binging with these messages, and
obviously, yeah, there'd be some government lawyers furiously working on this as we speak.
I think so, and I think it's really, look, there's only 3 people charged under the 2006 Act, so there's only a small group there. The question is, how is it going to relate to the trial for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and those that might have actually been involved with the 9/11 attacks?
Because he's the key guy that any US government wants to see prosecuted, and
I think everybody does.
Held
accountable
definitely.
and put through a fair system.
Yeah, so this ruling could have an implication on, if not the charges laid against him. I assume, from memory, he's charged with a lot more serious offences than providing support for terrorism, but it could certainly delay his trial even further.
It could. I think it's going to definitely give ammunition for the defence teams to raise these legal challenges, and it'll depend if the government wants to appeal and delay the process or just move on and deal with the other charges that exist.
How do you expect the Australian government to respond to this?
I just hate these questions. Look, I really, in a one way, it's too late, right? The government that should be responding is the government that was in power that ignored the Law Council of Australia, ignored the conduct of the British government, ignored the former Judge Advocate General to the Defence Forces saying this crime is not valid. That's really the question on what the response should have been back then.
Would you like to see an inquiry?
I don't know if we need an inquiry. Sometimes inquiries, you don't need an inquiry to state the obvious, which is it's not a valid offence, and it's time to probably recognise that officially and let everybody move on.
Well, Dan Murray, just stay there for the moment. We're joined now by Terry Hicks, David Hicks's father. Mr. Hicks, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning.
Has David been told about this case, and if he has, what's his reaction to it?
I haven't spoke with David yet. It'll be a few days before I catch up with him. He's got other things on at the moment. So I should say that this retrospective business we've been saying for the last few years that the procedure was to retrospect the laws before the dates of whatever happened so that they could actually charge David with something.
So do you believe this ruling should clear your son's name?
Well, it should. We've been, as I said before, we've been saying all along that the laws were being retrospected so that they could carry on with this procedure of charging him with something. Now Australia, we've asked for inquiries into all this business and into other things, but it's been sidelined, too hard basket, may get other people into trouble, whatever.
So you're feeling a great sense of vindication this morning, Terry Hicks?
Yeah, look, as I sort of said, this may release a bit of pressure, and who knows, it may not. We've been asking for an inquiry into this now, say, for a number of years, but as I say, the governments don't want to get off their hands to do anything about it because it becomes embarrassing to them.
Would you like to see those representing David Hicks at the moment, those lawyers representing your son, pursue this further based on what appears to be a very solid precedent set in the US Court of Appeals?
Look, I think now is probably the time to start doing something and to push this through.
What would it mean to you as his father for, if this case reads as Dan Mori says it does, would it mean for you, for your son, therefore, to have his conviction overturned? Of course, he can't get any of those years and months he served both in Adelaide prison and at Guantanamo Bay back. What would it mean to you to have David Hicks's name legally cleared?
Well, I suppose if David's name's legally cleared, that makes me feel a lot better. It'll make David feel a lot better. And also, I think the people that have supported David over the years, they'll be able to put their hands up and say, well, look, this is what we've been all working for.
David Hicks, thank you very much for your time. Terry Hicks, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Dan, what's your reaction to what you heard there from Terry?
I mean, it's emotional to hear Terry go through this and finally get some recognition of what he's been saying all along. You know, as a lawyer, you kind of, you can't help but get involved, but as a father, it's a lot more emotionally draining on him, and he's been dealing with it for quite some time.
He'd obviously support any push by the lawyers to do it.
Yeah.
And how influential is he in David's decision making?
I don't know. How influential is any father with their son? You know, sometimes sons listen, sometimes they don't.
You haven't spoken to David since this findings
got to answer his phone. Terry, I tried to call Terry. He didn't answer his cell phone either.
There are lots of phone calls being made this morning, but you're obviously been in touch with him. How's he doing?
I mean, I think he's hanging in there. But I do think this is an important step, the recognition that why he sat there for so long and wondering why he was being left there. And it was hard to explain to him that, look, they're making up crimes and keeping you here. I think the validity that these aren't a valid offense, and knowing that he was treated inappropriately, and hopefully there'll be some closure with the government.
What are the emotional and psychological scars he's been left with?
I mean, I think it's hard to put into words sitting in isolation for over 2 years. I mean, he was there for almost 2 years before access to a lawyer. He spent 8 months without access to sunlight. I don't know why, but that was done to him. And I think it only takes time and support from a family and friends to get over that type of thing.
You've invested a lot of your life. You're no longer officially with the US military, but you've invested a lot of your life, both professionally and personally. You regard yourself as a close friend of David Hicks. What does this mean to you personally?
Well, look, I can't help but say, you know, when I filed that motion back in 2004 at the very first hearing to deal with these motions, and it said, you know, material support for terrorism is not a valid offense, there is a little, you like the fact that I was right and I was down the right track. I didn't realize it would take 7 years or 8 years to get to vindication.
Because you copped a lot of personal criticism as well, didn't you, for your support?
Well, I think, you know, there really, any challenges to the commission system early on were scoffed at. And, you know, you sort of checked off as ridiculous claims. So finally to have a U.S. federal court say, no, you were right all along, and to proclaim it so that internationally everyone knows that these system used back then was just not appropriate.
Going back to Guantanamo Bay as a facility, regardless of what the implications are of this legal judgment, and despite the promises by Barack Obama to close it, it's still open. It does have that degree of permanency now about it, doesn't it?
Well, I think the challenge, if you go back, President Obama took over when he was elected. Then you saw the Attorney General in the U.S. wanting to take the detainees and try them in the U.S. federal court. Yes. And you saw a lot of resistance from our Congress and actually legislation being passed to try to obstruct him moving into the U.S. So I think he found it a lot harder within our own system. And that was probably the biggest challenge that he may not have anticipated.
Yeah. Do you see it staying where it is for many years yet, given those political obstacles in the States?
I mean, some of the senators and congressmen who are objecting to it have served quite some time and are probably going to retain their seats. So that will probably always be that resistance, especially because they were all supporters of the commission in Gitmo from the beginning. So they have a personal attachment to keep it going, to justify their decisions and positions they took.
Would you like to see further investigation into some of the injuries he sustained while he was at Guantanamo Bay?
I think it's always great to investigate. It would be great. I just don't know if there'll ever be an investigation that can pull people from the U.S. and force them to testify relating to his treatment.
Mm-hmm. Now, just Dan, for those just tuning in, perhaps just a reminder of just where things are and what the possible next steps for David Hicks and his legal team now may be.
Yeah, I mean, really, it has to decide whether or not there is anything else to do. I mean, the charge has been found invalid. The question is, does he have to do something? Does the Australian government who left him there just need to make some inquiries and look for a piece of paper that says, yes, this conviction is no longer valid?
Like a formal pardon, for instance,
a formal pardon,
from the US government?
Whether you call it by a pardon or whether the convening authority of the commissions could take action now and say, you know, I'm changing the finding of, you know,
yeah, we're seeking a response from the Australian government, so hopefully we'll have that shortly, undoubtedly.
Yeah, well, it's hit everybody's surprise,
very closely
I'm
as well.
sure.
Yeah, it's a fast-moving story.
Yeah.